The fluorescent lights of Savimart grocery store hummed their usual monotonous tune as Margaret Hayes slowly scanned items at checkout lane 7. Her weathered hands moved with deliberate care across each product, her reading glasses perched on the edge of her nose as she squinted at the barcodes. At 67, with silver hair tied in a neat bun and a simple blue cashier's vest, she looked like everyone's grandmother, kind, slow, and harmless. The young customers in line shifted impatiently, checking their phones and sighing loudly. Margaret just smiled apologetically and continued at her careful pace. What none of them knew was that those slow hands had once negotiated the release of 43 hostages from a bank siege. Those tired eyes had stared down armed terrorists without blinking. And that simple smile had been perfected over 30 years as the FBI's most decorated hostage negotiator. From which city in the world are you watching this story unfold today? If tales of underestimated heroes and hidden strength resonate with you, consider subscribing for more stories where appearances prove dangerously deceiving. Margaret had been working at Savimart for exactly 6 months, not because she needed the money, but because she needed the cover. The FBI had received credible intelligence that this particular grocery store in suburban Cleveland was being used as a money laundering front for a major criminal organization. Margaret's job wasn't to work the register. Her job was to observe, document, and wait for the right moment to strike. But nobody at Savimart knew this. To them, she was just Margaret, the slow cashier who asked too many questions about where people were from and what they did for work. The store's new manager, 28-year-old Bradley Morrison, made Margaret's cover more convincing than she'd planned. On his first day, he'd walked past her checkout lane, observed her careful scanning technique, and rolled his eyes dramatically. "Can't we get someone faster?" he'd muttered to his assistant manager, loud enough for Margaret to hear. "Old people shouldn't work registers." Margaret had looked up, smiled politely, and continued her work. Inside, she calculated that Bradley's arrogance would be a perfect cover, nobody would suspect a cashier that her own manager constantly belittled. This particular Tuesday morning started like any other. Margaret arrived at 6 a.m. for her opening shift, clocking in with the old-fashioned time card system Savimart still used. She arranged her station with precise movements, receipt paper loaded perfectly, bags organized by size, and her water bottle positioned exactly where she could reach it without looking. These weren't the habits of an elderly cashier. These were the habits of an operative who knew that in a crisis, every second and every position mattered. Bradley arrived at 7 a.m., his expensive suit and designer shoes announcing his presence before his voice did. "Margaret," he called out, not bothering to walk over to her lane. "Corporate says your scanning speed is 40% below average. You need to pick up the pace or we'll have to move you to stocking shelves." Other employees glanced at Margaret sympathetically, but she just nodded. "I'll try harder, Mr. Morrison," she replied in her soft, grandmotherly voice. Bradley smirked and walked away. He had no idea that Margaret's slow scanning was actually careful documentation. She was memorizing the purchasing patterns of every suspected money launderer who came through her line. By 10 a.m., the store was busy with the morning rush. Stay-at-home parents with young children, elderly shoppers taking their time, and stressed professionals grabbing quick lunches. Margaret recognized several faces, some were regular customers, others were on her FBI watch list. A man in a leather jacket, someone she'd identified as Subject Delta, made his third purchase of the week. Always cash. Always small items that didn't match his expensive car in the parking lot. Margaret scanned his energy drinks and beef jerky with her usual careful attention, all while memorizing the serial numbers on the $100 bills he handed her. Then, at 10:47 a.m., everything changed. The automatic doors slid open and 3 people walked in. Margaret's trained eye caught details that others missed, the way the first man's jacket hung heavy on one side, suggesting a concealed weapon. The second person's nervous glance toward the security cameras. The third's position near the exit, acting as a lookout. Margaret's pulse didn't quicken. She'd faced situations like this 47 times in her FBI career. But this time was different. This time, she was undercover, and any wrong move could blow months of investigation. The three individuals split up, moving through the aisles. Margaret continued scanning groceries for a young mother with 2 children, all while tracking the suspects' positions using the convex security mirrors mounted in the corners. Bradley was in his office, visible through the glass window, completely oblivious to the danger walking through his store. At 10:52 a.m., the first man approached checkout lane 3, where Kelly, a college student, worked. He pulled out a gun. "Everybody down. This is a robbery." The store erupted in screams. Shoppers dropped to the floor, parents covered their children, and employees froze in terror. The second robber, a woman, pulled out a weapon and began herding customers toward the front of the store. The third suspect locked the automatic doors and smashed the door controls, trapping everyone inside. "Nobody moves, nobody gets hurt," the first robber, clearly the leader, shouted. "We just want the money from the safe." Margaret slowly raised her hands, making herself appear frightened like the others. But her mind was racing through protocols, calculating angles, and assessing the situation. 3 armed suspects. Approximately 23 customers and 6 employees trapped inside. The store's panic button was under the main register, too far away. The leader was experienced, his movements confident. The woman seemed nervous, her gun hand shaking slightly. The lookout at the door was young, maybe early 20s, his eyes darting around wildly. These weren't professional criminals. This was a desperate, poorly planned robbery that could turn deadly in seconds. Bradley emerged from his office, his face pale. "Please, just take the money and leave," he stammered, his earlier arrogance completely gone. The leader walked toward him. "You're the manager. Good. Open the safe. You've got 2 minutes." As Bradley fumbled with his keys, dropping them twice, the nervous woman robber walked past the checkout lanes, her gun sweeping across the frightened faces. She stopped at Margaret's lane. "You. Old woman. Get over there with the others." Margaret moved slowly, deliberately keeping her movements non-threatening. She positioned herself near a young family, a father, mother, and their 2 small children who couldn't have been more than 5 and 3 years old. The children were crying, and their parents were trying desperately to keep them quiet. Margaret caught the mother's eye and gave a slight nod, a gesture that said "Trust me." 30 years of experience had taught her how to communicate calm in crisis situations. Bradley finally got the safe open, his hands shaking so badly he could barely handle the cash. "That's it? 30,000, the leader roared. "You're lying." "I swear, that's all we have." Bradley pleaded. "The armored car came yesterday." The leader's frustration was dangerous. Margaret recognized the signs. An irrational criminal who felt cheated was more likely to hurt someone. She needed to act, but carefully. The FBI had trained her for this exact scenario, but that was when she had backup, weapons, and authority. Now she had none of those things. Or did she? The nervous woman robber was pacing near the hostages, her gun waving erratically. "They've probably already called the cops," she said, her voice tight with panic. "We need to go, now. We're not leaving without more money," the leader snapped. He grabbed Bradley by the shirt. "Where's the rest? The office? The cash counting room?" "There is no counting room," Bradley cried. "This is a grocery store, not a bank." That's when the young lookout at the door shouted, "Cops." 3 police cars just pulled into the parking lot. The situation was about to turn deadly. Margaret could see it in the leader's eyes. He was calculating whether to shoot his way out or take hostages for negotiation. She had perhaps 30 seconds before this robbery turned into a hostage crisis. It was time to make a decision that would either save everyone or blow her entire investigation. Margaret slowly stood up from the floor. "Excuse me," she said in her soft, grandmotherly voice. The nervous woman swung her gun toward Margaret. "I said stay down." "I will," Margaret replied calmly. But first, may I ask, do you really want to go from robbery to murder? Because that's what's about to happen when those police outside try to come in. The three robbers looked at each other, confusion and panic on their faces. The leader turned to Margaret. "What are you talking about, old woman?" Margaret's demeanor changed. Subtle, but noticeable. Her back straightened slightly. Her voice lost its tremor. Her eyes, which had seemed kind and distant, became sharp and focused. "I'm talking about the fact that you've now been in here for 7 minutes. In about 3 minutes, the tactical units will arrive. You haven't taken hostages yet, which means they'll classify this as an active shooter scenario. They'll breach the building, and in the chaos, someone, probably one of these children, will get hurt or killed." The woman robber's gun hand was shaking more now. "How do you know all this?" Margaret took a small step forward, her movements calm and controlled. "Because I spent 30 years teaching them how to handle situations exactly like this one. My name is not Margaret Hayes. I'm Special Agent Margaret Brennan, FBI Hostage Rescue Team. And right now, I'm going to help you not turn this mistake into a life sentence." The store fell completely silent. Even the crying children stopped, sensing the shift in energy. Bradley's mouth fell open in shock. The other employees and customers stared at the slow old cashier with new eyes. The leader laughed, but it was forced. You're FBI. That's hilarious. Nice try, Grandma, but," Margaret's voice cut through like steel. "The scar on your right hand is from a burn, probably from cooking meth. She pointed to the woman, "have an ankle monitor under those jeans, I can see the outline. And she looked at the young lookout, "are terrified because this is your first serious crime and you're thinking about your mother right now, wondering what she'll say when she finds out." All three robbers went pale. Margaret had spent 6 months studying everyone who came through her line, but she'd also spent 30 years learning to read people in crisis. "Here's what's going to happen," Margaret continued, her voice firm but not aggressive. "In 2 minutes, my partner, who's been watching this store from across the street for 6 months, is going to call this phone." She pointed to the store's main phone at customer service. "You're going to answer it. And we're going to negotiate your surrender before anyone gets hurt." The leader's face went from shock to anger. "You're running a sting. This store is under surveillance." "Has been for 6 months, Margaret confirmed. "We were actually after the money laundering operation using this store as a front. You three just walked into the middle of a federal investigation." She gestured to the safe. "That money you were after. Half of it was marked bills we planted specifically to track. If you'd gotten away with it, we'd have found you within 24 hours. The nervous woman robber started crying. Oh God, we're so screwed." The young lookout slid down the door, sitting on the floor with his head in his hands. But the leader still had his gun pointed at Bradley. "Maybe we should take some hostages anyway. Buy ourselves time to think." "That's exactly what you shouldn't do," Margaret said firmly. "The moment you harm anyone, you cross a line you can't uncross. Right now, you're looking at armed robbery. Probably 7 to 10 years with good behavior. You start hurting people. You're looking at life without parole. Is that really worth $30,000? As if on cue, the store phone began to ring. Everyone's eyes moved to it. Margaret looked at the leader. "That's my partner. He's a good negotiator, but he's not as patient as I am. If I answer that phone and tell him everyone's safe, we can end this peacefully. Or you can make the call that brings SWAT through those windows. Your choice. You've got until the phone stops ringing." The phone rang a second time. A third. The leader's hand was shaking now, his confidence completely shattered. Bradley, still being held by the collar, found his voice. "Please," he whispered. "Just listen to her. Please." Fourth ring. The woman robber lowered her gun. "I'm done. I'm out." I'm not dying for this. Fifth ring. The young lookout was openly crying now. My mom. I can't. The leader looked around at his accomplices, then at the frightened faces of the hostages, then back at Margaret. If you're really FBI, prove it. Margaret reached slowly into her cashier vest, pulled out what looked like a regular name tag holder, and flipped it open. Inside was her FBI credentials and badge. Special Agent Margaret Brennan, 30 years with the Bureau, retired from hostage rescue team last year. Currently working undercover in criminal financial investigations. She held up the badge where everyone could see it. That phone is on its 6th ring. I answer on 7. Last chance. The leader's gun dropped to his side. Okay. Okay. Just tell them we surrender. Margaret walked calmly to the phone and picked it up on the 7th ring. Agent Brennan. Situation contained. 3 suspects surrendering. 0 injuries. Send in the tactical team to secure. She listened for a moment, then hung up. Drop your weapons on the floor, slowly. Hands on your heads. They're coming in. Within 30 seconds, the store doors were breached and a FBI tactical unit swarmed in, along with local police. The 3 robbers were quickly taken into custody, secured and led away. As paramedics checked the shaken hostages, Margaret helped calm the children who had been most frightened, her grandmother persona returning as she reassured them that everything was okay now. Bradley stood in the corner, his expensive suit wrinkled and his face pale with shock. Margaret walked over to him. Mr. Morrison, I need you to understand that this entire store has been under federal surveillance as part of a money laundering investigation. I was placed here specifically to document transactions and identify suspects. What happened today was unexpected. Bradley's voice came out as a whisper. You've been FBI this whole time. But you're so slow, I'm methodical, Margaret corrected gently. There's a difference. Every slow transaction was actually me gathering evidence. Every question I asked customers was intelligence collection. The FBI doesn't just hire young people with guns, Mr. Morrison. Sometimes the most effective agents are the ones nobody suspects. A tall man in a FBI jacket approached, Margaret's actual partner, Agent Tom Chen. Good work in there, Maggie. Though you could have waited for backup. Margaret smiled. With civilians and kids in danger. You taught me better than that, Tom. Tom Chen turned to Bradley. Mr. Morrison, we need to talk about your store's financial records. And you might want to call corporate, they're going to have some questions about their accountant. The full scope of the investigation came out over the next few hours. Savamart's head accountant had been using the store as a money laundering operation for a regional crime syndicate. The robbery, ironically, had been unrelated, just 3 desperate people making a terrible decision. But their terrible timing had actually helped Margaret's investigation by forcing her to reveal herself earlier than planned, which prevented the accountant from being tipped off about the investigation. As the store was processed as a crime scene, word spread quickly through the community. News vans arrived. Reporters wanted to interview the grandmother FBI agent who stopped a robbery. But Margaret declined all interviews, preferring to let her work speak for itself. Kelly, the college student who had been working checkout lane 3 when the robbery started, approached Margaret with tears in her eyes. You saved us. You saved all of us. And we all thought you were just a slow old woman. Margaret finished kindly. That was the point, honey. The best disguise is the one people create for themselves. I just let everyone make their assumptions. She patted Kelly's hand. Now, do you think you could help me with something? I need to finish scanning Mrs. Patterson's groceries. She's been waiting very patiently through all this excitement. Mrs. Patterson, a regular customer who had been shopping when the robbery occurred, laughed through her tears. Margaret, or should I say Agent Brennan, you take all the time you need, dear. As Margaret returned to her lane to complete the transaction, the absurdity of the situation wasn't lost on anyone. A FBI agent, who had just negotiated the peaceful surrender of armed robbers, was calmly scanning cereal and milk at a grocery store checkout. 3 months later, Savamart held a company-wide meeting at their corporate headquarters. The investigation Margaret had been conducting had resulted in the arrest of 12 individuals involved in the money laundering scheme, including the head accountant and 2 members of the store's management. Bradley Morrison sat in the audience, notably quieter and more humble than he'd been before. The CEO of Savamart stood at the podium, with Margaret beside him. "Today, we want to publicly thank Agent Margaret Brennan for her service," the CEO announced. "Not just for stopping the robbery that could have ended in tragedy, but for her months of dedicated work that exposed corruption in our own organization." The room erupted in applause. Margaret smiled modestly. "I was just doing my job. But I will say this, the next time you see someone working a cash register, or cleaning floors, or doing any job you think of as simple, remember that you don't know their full story. The person you underestimate might be the person who saves your life someday." Bradley approached Margaret after the ceremony. "Agent Brennan, I owe you an apology. Multiple apologies, actually. The way I treated you, the things I said, were perfect," Margaret interrupted. "Your disrespect made my cover more believable. Nobody suspects someone their boss constantly criticizes." She paused, then continued more seriously. "But Bradley, you learned something important: don't judge people's value by their age, their speed, or their appearance. Some of the most capable people I've known in my career looked nothing like what you'd expect. The young janitor might be working 3 jobs to support his family. The slow cashier might be documenting financial crimes. Treat everyone with respect, not because of what they might secretly be, but because they're human beings doing honest work." Bradley nodded, genuinely chastened. "I've learned that lesson. I promise." The Savamart location where the robbery occurred became something of a landmark in the community. They installed a plaque near the entrance, in recognition of everyday heroes who serve with quiet courage. It didn't mention Margaret by name, at her request, but everyone knew what it meant. Margaret officially retired from field work after the case closed, this time for real. She spent her days gardening, volunteering at a community center teaching self-defense classes to senior citizens, and occasionally consulting for the FBI when they needed expertise in hostage negotiation. But her legacy lived on in unexpected ways. The FBI's training academy added her case to their curriculum, studying how effective undercover work could be when agents embraced unconventional covers. Police departments updated their protocols for elderly witnesses and workers, training officers to recognize that valuable intelligence could come from any source. Kelly, the college student who had been at checkout lane 3, changed her major from business to criminal justice. Years later, she would join the FBI herself, inspired by the unassuming woman who had been scanning groceries beside her. On the 1-year anniversary of the robbery, Savamart held a community safety event. Margaret agreed to speak, though she kept her remarks brief. "A year ago, 3 people made a terrible decision that could have ended in tragedy. But it didn't. Why? Because in that moment, everyone, hostages, employees, even the robbers themselves, chose not to let fear dictate the outcome." She looked out at the crowd, which included former hostages, Savamart employees, and community members. "We live in a world where we often judge books by their covers. Where we assume that heroes look a certain way, act a certain way, come from certain backgrounds. But the truth is, courage lives in unexpected places. It lives in the quiet cashier who never complains. In the young parent shielding their child. In the scared robber who chooses surrender over violence." As Margaret finished speaking and stepped away from the microphone, a young boy from the audience, one of the children who had been in the store during the robbery, ran up and hugged her. "Thank you for saving us, Grandma Agent," he said. Margaret hugged him back, tears in her eyes. "Thank you for being brave, sweetheart." And in that moment, everyone understood the real lesson of Margaret Brennan's story: the most powerful people aren't always the ones with the biggest titles or the most impressive appearances. Sometimes, they're the ones who serve quietly, observe carefully, and act decisively when it matters most. The ones who let others underestimate them, right up until the moment they prove exactly how strong they really are. Have you ever dismissed someone as, just a cashier, just a janitor, just an elderly person? Margaret Brennan spent 6 months being underestimated, insulted, and overlooked. And in 7 minutes, she saved 29 lives and stopped 3 people from ruining theirs forever. The next time you see someone in a humble job moving slower than you'd like, remember, you have no idea who you're really looking at. The person scanning your groceries might be the only thing standing between you and disaster.